The late afternoon sun bathed the towering glass walls of Caldwell Industries in a golden glow, casting long shadows across the lavish top-floor office. Ethan Caldwell leaned back in his chair, his piercing gaze sweeping over the files spread out before him. At 37, he had it all. Power, prestige, an architectural empire that bore his name. Yet, in his meticulously controlled world, there remained one thing he still lacked: a child. His fingers tapped a slow, deliberate rhythm against the polished mahogany desk, mirroring the calculations running through his mind. In front of him lay the file of his most promising candidate, the woman who had agreed to his contract for surrogacy via IVF. Elena Carter, 24 years old. Excellent health, high IQ, no family history of genetic disorders. On paper, she was flawless, but numbers and statistics couldn't tell him the most crucial thing. Was she truly the right fit for his plan? The intercom buzzed, snapping him from his thoughts. He pressed the button, his assistant's voice crisp and professional. "Mr. Caldwell, Miss Carter has arrived." Ethan shut the file, his expression unreadable, his voice smooth yet commanding. "Send her in." The door opened, and in that instant, Ethan realized his world had just shifted in a way he never saw coming. The door opened, and Elena Carter stepped inside with a quiet composure that Ethan hadn't expected. On paper, she was ordinary, a librarian with an unremarkable life, surrounded by books. But standing before him now, she was nothing like the candidates he had interviewed before. No nervous fidgeting, no attempt to impress. She wore a simple navy blue dress, her chestnut hair cascading past her shoulders. The fading sunlight caught in her amber eyes, making them appear warmer, though her expression remained unreadable. "Sit." Ethan gestured to the chair opposite him, his gaze sharp and assessing. Elena nodded, pulling out the chair and sitting down, her hands resting in her lap. There was no tension, but there was a hint of caution. "Thank you for coming, Miss Carter." "Thank you for choosing me." Her voice was steady, firm, not eager, not desperate. Ethan tilted his head slightly, intrigued. "I'll get straight to the point. Have you read the contract thoroughly?" Elena didn't hesitate. "I have." "You want a child. No emotional ties. No involvement from the biological mother once the baby is born." Ethan nodded slightly. "Correct. The compensation is $5 million. Half upon successful implantation, the rest upon delivery. All medical expenses will be covered." Elena didn't react to the number, another interesting sign. "I agree to the terms." Her response was more immediate than Ethan had expected. He leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing. "I don't doubt your resolve, but I need to know one thing. Why would a woman like you, young, intelligent, unattached, agree to an arrangement like this?" For the first time, something flickered in Elena's eyes. She tightened her fingers slightly, but her voice remained composed. "Everyone has their reasons, Mr. Caldwell. I imagine you have yours as well." Ethan's gaze sharpened. A clever response, neither emotional nor defensive. She didn't beg for sympathy, didn't spin some heart-wrenching story to sway him. That made her different. "I'll need you to do something else." Elena raised a brow. "What is it?" Ethan stood, slowly walking around his desk, stopping just beside her. He could see the way her shoulders stiffened slightly at his proximity, yet she held his gaze. "You will live in my estate for 2 months before we proceed with the IVF." This time, Elena blinked in surprise. "That wasn't in the original agreement?" Ethan shrugged. The agreement just changed. The space between them grew heavier with unspoken tension. Elena was stepping into dangerous territory, and she knew it. But she still chose not to walk away. Elena didn't answer right away. She held Ethan's gaze, as if weighing what his request truly meant. 2 months in his estate. It wasn't just an adjustment to the contract. It was a test. "Buy the change?" Her voice was steady, unwavering. Ethan folded his arms, his expression unreadable. "I need to make sure you're suited for this. I don't want complications later." Elena was silent for a moment before giving a small nod. "All right, I'll move in." Ethan tilted his head slightly, the barest trace of approval flickering in his gaze. "Good." He turned back to his desk, opening the contract, preparing to finalize the last details. But before he could sign, Elena spoke. "There's something I need to tell you first." Ethan paused, his pen hovering just above the paper. His eyes flicked up to meet hers. "What is it?" Elena clasped her hands together briefly before steadying herself. Her voice remained firm as she spoke the words that she knew would change everything. "I've never been with anyone before." The silence that followed was deafening. The faint ticking of the clock on the wall was the only sound in the room. Ethan stared at her, his deep blue eyes narrowing slightly in rare surprise. "What did you just say?" "I've never been intimate with anyone," she repeated, clearer this time. Ethan set his pen down, leaning back in his chair, studying her intently. A small but significant shift in the plan. Enough to make him reassess everything. Elena moved into Ethan's estate on a Monday morning, bringing only a small suitcase and the determination not to let herself get lost in his world of luxury. The Caldwell estate was vast and immaculate, so perfect it felt almost unreal. Everything was designed with precision. Minimalist, elegant, and completely devoid of warmth. It was a reflection of its owner, flawless but empty. "My house has rules," Ethan said as he led her down the long hallway. "Breakfast is at 8. I don't tolerate clutter, and I don't want any disruptions to my work." Elena raised an eyebrow. "Sounds more like a contract than a home." Ethan stopped, turning to face her. "Everything in my life runs on rules." Elena said nothing, but she silently wondered if that truly made him happy. The first few days passed in a strange rhythm. Ethan was too occupied with work, while Elena spent most of her time in the grand library. She read, walked through the rose garden, and occasionally watched Ethan from a distance as he worked. He was a man of discipline, yet there were moments when she glimpsed something else, a hidden exhaustion, a loneliness he refused to acknowledge. One afternoon, she found him in the garden, his sleeves rolled up, meticulously tending to the roses. "Didn't expect someone like you to have a hobby like this," she remarked, standing a few steps away. Ethan didn't look up. "They belonged to my grandmother. She taught me how to care for them when I was a kid." Elena glanced at the deep crimson blooms, their beauty as mysterious as the man before her. "She must have been special." Ethan was silent for a few seconds. "She was the only one who ever believed I could be a good person." For the first time, Elena saw a crack in his carefully constructed walls, and for the first time, Ethan realized someone was actually seeing him. A week later, Ethan took Elena out to dinner. Not to some extravagant restaurant with dazzling chandeliers and conversations about business, but to a small, intimate Italian place tucked away in the quieter part of the city. "You come here often?" Elena asked as they stepped inside. Ethan pulled out a chair for her, a gesture that seemed second nature rather than intentional. "My grandmother used to bring me here every Sunday when I was a kid. It hasn't changed much." Unlike the formal dinners before, there was no tension, no feeling that this was just part of a contract. In this moment, Ethan wasn't the calculating CEO. He was just a man reminiscing about old memories. "So, why bring me here tonight?" she asked, sipping her wine, her gaze studying him over the candlelight. Ethan set his glass down, his fingers tracing the rim absent-mindedly. "I think it's time we get to know each other beyond the terms of our agreement." The space between them grew quiet, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was a silence thick with meaning, as if they were standing at the edge of something neither of them could quite define. "Elena," Ethan said slowly, his gaze unwavering, "why did you really agree to this contract?" Elena exhaled softly, setting her glass aside. "Because sometimes life doesn't give us many choices." The honesty of her answer hit Ethan in a way he didn't expect. And before he could think twice, he leaned in. Elena closed her eyes just as his lips met hers. It wasn't tentative or unsure. It was slow yet deep, as if they were both discovering something they hadn't anticipated. When they pulled apart, both were slightly breathless. Elena opened her eyes, looking up at him. "Ethan, don't say anything," he murmured, his gaze dark with an emotion even he wasn't sure he was ready to face. But, ready or not, everything between them had just changed. The morning after their kiss, something had undeniably shifted in the Caldwell estate. Elena couldn't ignore the change. The way Ethan's gaze lingered on her longer than before, the subtle touches as they passed each other, the charged silence that hung between them. But their fragile peace didn't last long. 3 days later, Ethan's phone rang non-stop from early morning. Victoria's voice was sharp and urgent. "Ethan, we have a problem. Your arrangement with Elena, it's all over the news." Ethan shot up from his chair. "What?" Elena was in the library, but she could hear the heavy footsteps echoing through the hallway as Ethan stormed into his office and turned on his screen. A bold headline flashed across the front page. CEO Ethan Caldwell and his love contract, business or pleasure. Their pictures were plastered on the screen. A candid shot of them leaving the Italian restaurant, and another outside the estate, where Ethan's hand rested protectively on her back. Elena entered the office just in time to see the fury flash in Ethan's cold blue eyes. "Who leaked this?" His voice was dangerously low. "David Monroe." Victoria's response was swift. "He got his hands on your contract with Elena. I don't know how, but he's using it to smear you." Ethan's fist clenched. "Of course it's him." Elena stiffened. "The contract? You mean the original contract?" Victoria hesitated for a second before nodding. "He's spinning a story, that Elena played you for money, that this was all a calculated scheme." Ethan turned to Elena, his eyes flickering with something she never thought she'd see directed at her. Doubt. "Did you have anything to do with this?" Elena froze. "You think I leaked it?" "I don't know what to think, Elena." His voice was edged with frustration. "You met Monroe, didn't you? And now, somehow, he has our contract." It felt like a punch to the chest. "You're accusing me?" The anger in his eyes clashed with the pain in hers. "I swear to you, Ethan, I had nothing to do with this." Her voice trembled. "But if you can't trust me, then maybe we should stick to what we originally agreed upon." She turned away, her heart tightening, leaving Ethan standing there, torn between logic and the very emotions he had spent his whole life avoiding. And for the first time in years, Ethan realized he might be about to lose the one thing that truly mattered. 3 days after Elena left, the Caldwell estate was suffocatingly silent. The library, once filled with her quiet presence, now felt unbearably empty. Ethan found himself standing in front of her favorite chair, fingers grazing the fabric as if expecting to find a trace of her warmth. Sleep eluded him. Every night he replayed their last conversation, her broken expression haunting him. He had been so blind, and now he might have lost her forever. Victoria walked into his office without knocking, a file in hand. "You were wrong, Ethan." Ethan glanced up, his eyes hollow. "Wrong about what?" She tossed the file onto his desk. "Elena didn't leak the contract. Here's the proof. The person who sold it to Monroe was your former assistant, Amanda. She did it to get back at you for firing her brother for embezzling company funds." The truth hit Ethan like a fist to the gut. "Damn it." Victoria crossed her arms, her voice sharp. "The question is, what are you going to do about it?" Ethan didn't answer. He simply stood, grabbed his car keys, and left. The library was quiet in the late afternoon. Elena was stacking books when a shadow fell over her. "Ethan..." He stood there, dressed in his usual suit, but something in his gaze had shifted. No coldness, no hesitation, only regret. And something deeper. "I was wrong," Ethan said, his voice low but firm. "I don't care about the contract. I don't care about the past or what people say. The only thing I care about is that I can't live without you." Elena's heart pounded. "Ethan." He stepped closer, taking her hands in his. "I love you, Elena, and I'll do whatever it takes to prove it." Elena swallowed hard. "What if I don't forgive you?" Ethan let out a soft chuckle, but his eyes were filled with raw sincerity. "Then I'll keep trying until you change your mind." And then, right there in the quiet library, before an audience of strangers, Ethan kissed her. Not as an experiment, but as a promise. 9 months later, the Caldwell estate was no longer a place of cold precision. It was filled with warmth, laughter, and most notably, the cries of newborns. Ethan stood outside the delivery room, his usually composed demeanor nowhere to be found. His shirt was wrinkled, his hands buried in his hair. "Why is this taking so long?" Victoria leaned against the wall, smirking. "Are you nervous? Aren't you Ethan Caldwell? The man who never loses control?" Ethan shot her a glare. "Shut up, Victoria." Before she could tease him further, the doors burst open. A nurse stepped out with a bright smile. "Congratulations, Mr. Caldwell. Your wife just delivered 2 healthy baby girls." Time stopped. Ethan blinked, his brain struggling to process. "Wait, 2? Yes, sir, you have 2 little princesses." Victoria burst into laughter. "Oh my God, Ethan, you signed a contract and yet your wife still outsmarted you." Ethan staggered slightly, muttering, "The contract, it only mentioned 1. I didn't plan for this." When the nurse led him inside, Elena was resting, exhausted but glowing. She looked up at him with a tired smile. Surprise? Ethan stared at the 2 tiny miracles in her arms before sighing in defeat, chuckling softly. "You win this time." The next morning, Elena woke up to a shocking sight. Her bank account balance wasn't just $5 million as per the contract, but Ethan's entire fortune. She grabbed her phone and called him. "Ethan, what the hell is this?" Ethan, rocking their daughters in his arms, casually shrugged. "The contract changed. You didn't just give me a child, you gave me 2. You deserve it all." Elena stared at him, then at the absurdly large number in her bank account. "So, let me get this straight. Instead of me marrying a billionaire, I just turned my husband into a broke, stay-at-home dad?" Victoria burst out laughing from across the room. "Oh, this is priceless. Ethan, you've been out-negotiated by your own wife." Ethan smirked, unfazed. "Best deal I ever made." Elena was speechless. "So instead of your wife becoming a billionaire, you're the one who ends up broke?" Victoria raised an eyebrow. "Ethan, you're a business genius, but it looks like your wife just pulled the ultimate win." Ethan only smiled, leaning down to kiss Elena's forehead. "I don't need money. Everything I need is right here." Elena looked at him, her heart full, and she knew this was no longer just a contract. This was love. This was family. 1 year later, the Caldwell estate was no longer a cold structure of glass and steel. It was filled with laughter, tiny footsteps running through the halls, and the sweet voices of 2 little girls, Rosie and Lily, Ethan's precious daughters. One late afternoon, Ethan led Elena to the Rose Garden, the very place where they had first truly seen each other. Victoria was babysitting the twins, giving him the perfect moment to carry out his plan without little hands tugging at his shirt. Elena stood among the blooming flowers, inhaling their familiar scent. "Why did you bring me out here?" Ethan gazed at her, his expression softer than ever. Without a word, he knelt, pulling out a velvet box. "We started with a contract, but you became the greatest surprise of my life. I love you, Elena, not because of an agreement, not because of circumstance, but because of you. Will you marry me?" Elena's breath caught in her throat. For a moment, she couldn't speak. Memories flashed through her mind. The contract, the cold business deal, the stolen glances, the first hesitant kiss, the way he held their daughters as if they were his entire world. This wasn't just a proposal. It was everything she never dared to dream of. Swallowing back the lump in her throat, she whispered, "Yes, Ethan. 1,000 times yes." 3 weeks later, they had a simple wedding in the Rose Garden, with their 2 little daughters tossing petals as their mother walked toward their father. No lavish ceremonies, no contracts. Just love, family, and a promise for the future. And this time, it was a promise made from the heart.